All right, so let's jump right in. For literally billions of people, baptism and the Lord's Supper are at the very heart of their faith. But there's so much more than just rituals with some water, bread, and wine. Today, we're going to explore them as these powerful, tangible acts of communication, what our source material calls visible words.
And that's really the big question, isn't it? I mean, how do these incredibly ordinary, physical things become the stage for something so spiritually profound? Well, to even begin to answer that, we've got to go back, way back, to a foundational idea that underpins this whole thing.
And that foundation, that key that unlocks everything, is the concept of a covenant. See, before we can even begin to understand the signs, the water, the bread, the wine, we have to get a handle on the promise, the binding agreement that they represent.
Now, to really feel the weight of this, you have to look at the original language. The Hebrew for making a covenant isn't to make, it's to cut. This wasn't just shaking hands on a deal. This was a life and death treaty, a solemn oath that was sealed with a physical sign. The stakes were as high as they could possibly be.
So with that kind of seriousness in mind, this core idea of visible words starts to make so much more sense. These acts aren't just quiet reminders. They are tangible, physical actions that actually speak. They communicate God's promise in a way you can literally see and touch and taste. So let's start with the first one, baptism.
So baptism is the great sign of initiation, right? It's the front door to the Christian community. But to really understand it, the New Testament itself points us backward to its Old Testament predecessor, circumcision.
And right here, we see this incredible evolution in symbolism. Circumcision was a symbolic, partial cutting off, a sign that the person was spared from being entirely cut off by God's judgment. But with baptism, wow, the symbolism becomes way more intense. It's about being entirely buried under the waters of judgment with Christ so that you can be raised entirely into a brand new life with Him. It's a total, all-in identification with His death and His resurrection.
Okay, so if this sign is that powerful, that total, it leads directly to one of the biggest, most enduring debates in all of church history. Who, exactly, should get it? Is it only for people who are old enough to profess their own faith, or should the children of believers be included in this sign too? This whole debate, and it's a big one, really boils down to how you see the relationship between the Old and New Testaments. The Pedo-Baptist view, which is for infant baptism, really leans into this idea of covenant continuity. The argument is, if children were included in the covenant community through circumcision back then, why wouldn't they be included through baptism now? But the Baptist view emphasizes a shift, arguing that baptism is a sign that must follow a personal, conscious profession of faith. Both sides are making their case from the Bible, and it's still a major dividing line today.
So from that one-time sign of initiation, we move to the repeated meal of the community, the Lord's Supper. You could almost think of it this way. If baptism is the bath you take at the very beginning of the journey, the supper is the family meal God provides all along the way.
And the historical context here is just fascinating, and it's something we can easily miss. In the ancient world, you didn't just sign a treaty and then go have dinner. The meal was the signing ceremony. Sharing that food sealed the deal. So the Lord's Supper is a covenant-sealing meal. It's called a sacrificial meal because it's where believers get to partake in the benefits of Christ's one-time sacrifice, not because they're making a new sacrifice over and over.
And the scope of this meal is just incredible. It's not locked into a single moment. When you participate, you're looking backward, remembering the Passover and Christ's ultimate sacrifice. You're experiencing the present, actually participating in the benefits of that sacrifice right now, and you're looking to the future, getting a little sneak peek, a foretaste of that great wedding feast that's still to come. It connects past, present, and future all in one act. But this, of course, leads us to what is maybe the most controversial, most divisive question in the history of this sacrament. When Christians take the bread and the wine, what is actually going on? How exactly is Christ present in that meal?
And it all comes down to these 4 words. When Jesus held up that piece of bread and said, "This is my body," what on earth did he mean? Was that a metaphor? Was it literal? Was it something else entirely? The answers to that one question have shaped entire branches of the Christian faith for centuries.
Okay, so let's break down the 4 historic views. First up, the Roman Catholic view, transubstantiation. This says the very substance of the bread and wine are actually transformed into Christ's physical body and blood, even if they still look and taste like bread and wine. Then you have Martin Luther, who said, hold on a minute. He believed Christ's body is present bodily, in, with, and under the elements, but the bread is still bread and the wine is still wine.
Then John Calvin comes along with the Reformed view, seeing Christ's presence as spiritual, that believers are lifted up by the Holy Spirit to feed on Christ in heaven by faith. And finally, you have the memorial view from Zwingli, who argued the meal is a powerful symbol, a way for us to remember Christ's sacrifice, but without any special unique presence of Christ at that moment.
Now, you might be thinking, wow, okay, that is a lot of abstract theology. But here's the thing. This stuff isn't just for dusty old books. The way a church understands these signs directly shapes its identity, its mission, its very life. These aren't just theories. They have massive practical consequences. It kind of comes down to this idea that a church is what it eats. According to our source material, if you completely separate the sign from the reality it points to, you end up with a weak church. Basically just a voluntary social club. If you confuse the sign with the reality, you can get a triumphal church, one that starts to act like it's a substitute for Christ himself. But if you properly unite the sign and the reality, you get a dependent church, one that lives in constant hope and reliance on Christ and his promised return.
Which brings us right back to where we started. If these ancient physical practices are truly visible words, what message are they speaking? Well, they're speaking of judgment and grace, of initiation and sustenance, of a life and death promise made in the past, realized in the present, and guaranteeing an absolutely spectacular future. The real question then for all of us is, are we listening?